Hello everyone! Like I've mentioned in my previous video, we're gonna check out at least one more game from round 7 of the 2018 Biel Chess Festival, but we're gonna show both of them, as we've already seen one, Svidler's very nice victory against Georgiadis, but now we have Magnus Carlsen versus Maxime Vachier-Lagrave. In the first half of the tournament, you've seen they've reached a pretty equal endgame, but then Carlsen was able to push the drawn position into a full point. What happened, it's also very interesting. We'll just have to check it out and see. And as yesterday was a rest day, we're gonna check out some of the photos, and also we have a couple of photos before the tournament. So here you have a photo of Carlsen taking a selfie with a fan. Well, rather, a fan is taking a selfie with Magnus Carlsen, and in my opinion, this is not the correct way to take a selfie. You should really hold the smartphone horizontally, not vertically, as you know, while this might look nice on your Instagram story, anywhere else it will not, the format will just not be okay. So, just take, hold your smartphone horizontally, and then, you can always shift your smartphone 90 degrees, but, not a lot of people will shift their PC monitors 90 degrees. So yeah, just thought I'd share that with you guys. So here we have a photo of Carlsen, putting his and MVL's name in the sheet before the game. So if any of you are interested in Carlsen's handwriting, this is it basically. Then we have a game before the start of the game. This is the handshake. Here we have a photo of Carlsen pondering on the position. It's a very, very difficult game, so it's a realistic photo. And here, my favorite of this video, here is a very nice close-up of Maxime Vachier-Lagrave, a very serious photo with the mustache and everything, and you can see his eyes are somewhat bloody. But this photo was taken before the game even started, so it's not due to the complexity of the position, but rather there was a boat trip yesterday, so I guess they had a very nice party, which, if that's the case, makes this game that more impressive. So without further ado, let's check out the game. We already seen one Najdorf in Svidler Georgiadis, so here we're gonna see another one. Carlsen opens with e4, and we all know what Maxime replies to e4, as he's a well-known Sicilian expert. He goes c5. Knight to f3, d6. We already said that we will have a Najdorf on the board, so there it is, a6. And Carlsen plays f3 here. We have e5, kicking the knight away from a central square, knight b3, and bishop to e6. Bishop to e3, h5, a very nice move, not allowing white to expand in the future with h4 and g4. Queen to d2, and now comes knight b to d7. Knight to d5, we have bishop captures on d5, pawn captures on d5, and now g6. Bishop to e2, bishop to g7, preparing to castle kingside, and here it's alright to castle both kingside and queenside, depends on what kind of a game are you interested in playing, as yesterday was a rest day, they were on a boat. Carlsen was not, at least I don't think he was, so maybe he wasn't feeling all that well or something. Most people would castle queenside here, as they already have f3 played. Maybe then you will play h4, g4, and start pushing. It's very unlikely that black will castle queenside in any variation, but Carlsen prefers castles kingside. So okay, we have castles kingside, a5 now, preparing to push a4, which would pretty much force the knight to go back, as the knight really doesn't have all that many good squares here. So Carlsen pushes a4 himself, and not allowing Maxime to push it. We have castles, and now comes bishop to b5. Queen to c7, and now c4. We have b6, and now comes h3. Knight to c5, knight captures, b captures on c5, and now Carlsen said that he was very happy with his position here. He really controls the light squares on the queen side completely, and he said that he did like his position, but he mostly enjoyed it because he had this rook to a3 to b3 plan, but without that, he said that white didn't really have much here. So okay, rook to a3, going on with his plan, knight to h7, preparing f5, rook to b3 now, and now comes f5, preparing f4 and e4 even. Bishop to c6, Carlsen is now threatening to bring the rook over to b7, and here there are two ways to prevent this. You can go rook b8 or rook to a7. It's very interesting. Both ideas are very interesting. Maxime says that he didn't enjoy rook to a7 because of this queen to e1 move. Queen to e1 move, a very nice idea, simply freeing the d2 square for the bishop, and then after bishop goes to d2, the queen bishop battery will be eyeing the a5 pawn, and after the rook comes to b5, it will be very hard to defend the a5 pawn. So instead of rook to a7, Maxime decided after bishop to c6 to go rook 8 to b8, simply counter the rook on b3. Carlsen played rook to b5, he was very happy about this. Now you can't really capture the rook after a captures, you know, you just created white a free pass pawn. That's not how you play chess. So after rook to b5, we have f4, attacking Carlsen's bishop. Carlsen plays bishop to f2, and now comes e4. And now comes the very nice moment in the game. Here MVL said that he thought that Carlsen could never allow this pawn to ever reach e3. He thought that after pawn captures, he will play bishop to e5, creates a nice blockade here, and then he will be able to set up his pieces and pawns the way he prefers on the king side, and maybe even, you know, consider pushing here. But he missed Carlsen's next move. Carlsen played queen to c2, and Carlsen said that he saw this move a long time ago, and that he kind of knew, or that he was hoping that Maxime would miss this, and it did happen. So a very nice idea by Carlsen. The idea here is if you now push e3, which Maxime thought was impossible, because how could you ever allow this, you know, to create such a powerful pass pawn? It's because bishop to e1 is now the move that gives white a lot of advantage, because now your g6 pawn is hanging and your a5 pawn is hanging, and you cannot defend both of them. So Maxime had to refrain from playing this, and he played queen to e7, now preparing to push e3, but now Carlsen captures with the queen. Queen captures on e4, we have queen captures, pawn captures, and now comes knight to g5. Rook to e1, defending the e4 pawn, and now knight to f7. Here Carlsen plays rook to b1, he protects the b2 pawn while getting ready to capture here. Knight goes to g5, Maxime brings the knight back, attacks the e4 pawn, as he doesn't think Carlsen can actually capture the a5 pawn, but Carlsen does this. He plays rook captures on a5, and now Maxime plays rook to b3. Carlsen counters it, rook to b5, and here Carlsen said that while he was calculating rook captures on a5 and everything, that he thought that, okay, you can't play rook to b3 because now you'll have to exchange. But here Maxime played rook to d3, and Carlsen said in an interview after the game that he forgot that the d3 square even existed. He didn't even take this move into consideration. But you know, the rook is perfectly fine there. It's a light square, white can't kick it away from there. So okay, rook to e1, guarding the e4 pawn, and now comes f3. And now white is in a whole lot of trouble here. Of course you cannot capture, knight captures, deals check, wins the exchange and the game. So after f3, h4 was played, kicking away Maxime's knight. Knight to f7, and now what do you play here? It's interesting that the move that seems perfectly logical, g3, would actually cost you the game in the long run. Here it seems like, okay, you created a weak f3 pawn, now you'll play rook e3 next move, but it doesn't work, because after knight comes to e5, you are, although you do have a dark square bishop, you will be extremely weak on the dark squares. For example, rook to f1, rook to d2 now. After white plays any move, black will play knight to g4, and now there is very little you can do here. If you move the bishop, then pawn to f2 is coming. If you don't move the bishop, any move you play, let's say bishop to d7, would lose you the game. The bottom line is white would have to sacrifice the exchange here, and then he would pretty much be playing a losing endgame. Or if you don't, if you play something like bishop d7, attack the knight, then knight captures, rook captures, and now you see how white is very weak on the dark squares. Of course, there is no way to defend here, and you lose the game. So after knight to f7, Carlsen, of course, did not play g3, he played a5. He simply started pushing his pass pawn, which is what you should do with pass pawns. Which, I will say this because a lot of you mentioned this in the comments. When I say a passed pawn, I mean a pass pawn, P-A-S-S-E-D. A passed pawn. I do not say a fast pawn. So although a passed pawn is very fast, it's not a fast pawn, it's a passed pawn. So I hope that's settled now. Knight to e5. a6, Carlsen continues pushing his passed pawn, rook to d2, and then now comes a7. And here Maxime plays f captures on g2, allowing this knight to now deliver check on f3, even allowing Carlsen to temporarily bring his queen into the game. So Carlsen plays it, a8 queen, knight to f3 check, forcing the king to capture on g2, king captures, and now knight captures on e1 with check. Bishop cannot recapture because the bishop is pinned, king to f1, and now rook captures on f2. King captures on e1, and only now rook captures on a8. King captures on f2, and now rook to f8 check. And as you can see, after all is said and done here, it seems Carlsen is up a pawn, but he's not going to be able to keep this pawn if he tries to defend the h4 pawn, because Maxime wants to bring his rook over to f4. If you play something like king g3, you will get bishop to g3, bishop to e5 check, forcing your king to move back. For example, king g2, and then the rook will win this pawn. If you are persistent and try to defend this pawn, for example, king to h3, then after rook to f2, you will lose the game, as there is no defense against rook to h2 checkmate. So, you know, there is an active king, but there is also a too active king, which is never good. So, after rook to f8 check, king to e2 was played, rook to f4, of course Maxime wants to grab Carlsen's extra pawn, b4, c captures on b4, and now Carlsen doesn't even bother recapturing, but rather he pushes c5. And this is a very nice example of active play. Now you're giving black so many options what to do. You can capture on h4, you can capture on c5, you can capture on e4 with check. There are so many options here. Let's say you play d captures on c5, then you get d6, and now the bishop is guarding the e4 pawn. You can no longer capture with the rook. After we play bishop to f6, guarding the queening square, the d8, white will simply bring his king over. You will capture this pawn, and then white will play king c4 and capture all of these pawns, and you know, it will be a close game, most likely a drawn game, but it's only white that will be able to push for something more here. On the other hand, after this c5 move, you could play something like rook captures on e4 with check. Then you get king to f3 attacking the rook, rook captures here, and then rook to b8 check, king f7, and only now captures on d6. Bishop to f6, a must play move. You would have to protect the queening square, but now bishop to e8 check. King moves, and now d7. The rook is already guarding the queening square, but it doesn't matter. b3 is coming here, and after you bring the queen into the game, captures. Now rook to b4 is coming, and it seems like it's actually now black that will be able to queen, but luckily white has a rook to d6, and now it's forced to draw. After b2, bishop captures on g6, guarding the queening square. You will win white's light square bishop, and now it's 2 rooks and 2 pawns, a completely drawn endgame. So although it is a draw, Maxime still goes bishop to e5, allowing Carlsen to capture. So we had pawn captures on d6, and now bishop captures on d6. King to d3, king to f7, rook to b6, threatening to move this bishop with a discovery and to win this dark square bishop, but bishop to c5 by Maxime. Rook to b5 by Carlsen, bishop to d6, rook to b6, bishop to c5, and rook back to b5, and it was in this position on move 49 that the players agreed to a draw. So a very nice game. Definitely it was Carlsen who was struggling to save his position. Later he did achieve a sort of a promising position, but there was never anything actually there. But in the first half of the tournament, of course, he would try to push for something if there was something to push for, but here there wasn't. So a very nice game, especially after a rest day and after a nice boat party, by both of them. Really enjoyable chess. So yeah, that's Carlsen versus MVL from round 7 of the 2018 Biel Chess Festival. I do hope you enjoyed it and that you're enjoying the series so far. I would like to thank Bill Hammer for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon with another game from round 7 of the 2018 Biel Chess Festival, and then we're gonna check out the standings. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.